Welcome back to MVM today. I'm looking at not one, not two, but three new games set in the Valeria universe. These are all from Daily Magic, who's running a Kickstarter right now for all three games. You can get one, you could get all three. The interesting thing here is each of these have completely different mechanics. We've got a trick-taking game, a roll and write, and a card and dice solo experience. Now, these are small box games with a little bit of a bite-sized approach. However, these pack a little bit more punch than you might expect. I'm going to give you an overview of each one so you can have some big takeaways from what these games do. And I'm going to start with Thrones of Valeria, the trick-taking game, which is near and dear to my heart. Now I've got the game set up right here in front of me. Do note that this is a prototype, obviously, so the final components will be much different than what you see here. But like any trick-taking game, there's going to be a deck of cards, but unlike many, there's a board in the center of the table. And in the center of this board is this hierarchy, or this standings track of the different suits in the game. Each of the 5 suits are going to effectively represent the houses of Valeria, and every one of those has cards ranked 1 to 9. Now, it's not just ranks that you're worried about here, but the powers of those cards too, because each card is going to have a power that is executed when every card is played. And I will explain every one of those powers towards the end of this overview, but I do want to go through an example here set up in front of me just to give you a flavor for how this game plays, how those powers come into play, and how this standings track will affect the game overall. Now, the houses are going to be randomly assigned onto the standing track at the beginning of the game, effectively setting up the hierarchy of the different suits. In this case, pink would be the highest suit, all the way down to red being the lowest suit. Now, the other thing you're going to notice here are these coin values. You've got 5, 3, 1, -1, and -3. These are actually the amounts of money you're going to win when winning a trick with that color suit. Because this is a game not just about taking tricks, but collecting money for those tricks. And as you can see, every player starts with 2 silver. But throughout the game, through taking tricks and potentially playing certain cards, you're going to collect more and more money. And whether you're playing competitively, every man for himself, or in teams, the most money is going to win the end of the game. And there is also a leftover deck of cards. Now, what this means is it's not perfect information that you're going to have for everybody's hands. Plus, there are some powers on certain cards that are going to let you interact with that deck and potentially gain new cards into your hand. It really adds a dash of chaos to this that makes a trick-taking game just a little bit more fun. So I'll show a variation of an example from the rulebook that will give you an idea of the flow of any given trick. Let's say this player here plays a white 5. The first thing you're going to do is execute the power of the rank, which is a 5. In this case, it's the Necromancer. That allows you to draw 3 cards from the top of the deck, choose one, add it to your hand, and discard the other 2 back to the bottom of the deck. Now it's the next player's turn, and like most trick-taking games, you do have to follow suit. So if that player had white, they must play it. But in this example, they don't have any white. So they're going to play this blue 4. The 4 is the rogue, and its power is to swap 2 adjacent houses on the standing track. So this player decides to swap the blue and the white, now placing blue higher than white on the standing, therefore winning this trick for the time being. The next player has white, but he doesn't have higher than a 5. So he's going to play a white 3 and make the most of a situation by using its power to simply take 3 more silver from the supply. And the last player is going to do a variation on that. He's out of white as well, so he's going to play a red 2 and make the most of the situation by stealing 2 silver from any opponent. He decides to take 2 silver from the player right before him. So as you can see, there's actually quite a bit going on just in one trick that's part of a whole hand. Remember, the coins are points, and we've already seen those bouncing around the table, not to mention some of the houses changing their standings. So let's go back and take a look at who won this trick. As you can see, this is fairly simple to determine. You're going to look at the standing track and see that blue is higher than all of the other suits. There's white and red, which are both right here. Blue being at this position is going to win the trick, and 3 silver for doing so. So I think there's a couple big takeaways here for this variation on the trick-taking game. The first is this standings track. Not only does it determine the hierarchy of the different houses, but the interesting thing here is it's going to determine the points or the coins that you're going to score by winning a trick. And that can be as many as 5 coins and as few as -3, which brings in some interesting strategies for sure. And of course, the other big hook are the powers on the cards. There are 9 different cards, so I'm going to run down each power right now just to give you an idea of the different things that can happen at the table. Rank 1 is the Assassin. This one lets you move one house to the bottom of the standings board, shifting all of the other houses up. 2 is the Thief. This you've seen. It lets you take 2 silvers from any opponent. We also saw the 3, or the Mercenary. This one simply lets you gain 3 silver coins from the supply. The 4 card, or the Rogue, lets you swap the positions of 2 adjacent houses on the standing board. And you've seen the Necromancer in action too. It allows you to draw 3 cards from the deck, look at them without showing the other players, add one of them to your hand, and put the other 2 at the bottom of the deck. The Alchemist is rank 6. If you win this trick, you gain 6 silver coins instead of the usual house standings. So this one would allow you to win a trick at the bottom of the standings board and avoid those negative coins. The 7 is the Sorceress. This one simply lets you gain 1 silver coin from the supply, but you also have to discard 1 card from your hand. The 8 card lets you lock or unlock a house's standing position for this trick only. And the 9 is the Matriarch. This one lets you move 1 house up 2 spaces and move the others down 1 space each. And there are 3 Jester cards in the deck. Each one is going to allow you to either pay some amount of silver to raise it above all other houses, or pay nothing and treat the card as a rank 0. Now, there are some unique rules for getting those Jesters into play, but you can already see with those and all of the other powers, this trick-taking game adds enough variation to make you kind of rethink how you approach a trick-taking game in general. And like I said, this is just the first of 3 games. The next one I'm going to talk about is Dice Kingdoms of Valeria. This is the roll and write. Now, as with any roll and write, you're going to have some player sheets to fill out, which is going to make up your player area. And of course, there's going to be some dice that are shared by everyone. And in this case, some statue cards, which are also shared by everyone. These are going to be cards that you might acquire throughout the game that's going to give you some end of game scoring. But let's take a look at those player sheets really quick, and then I'm going to walk through kind of a sample turn to give you a sense for how this game flows. Across the top of the left-hand sheet is the Citizens Tableau. As you collect more and more citizens throughout the game, you're going to, during the harvest phase, put them to work by activating them in the various guilds on that same sheet. Each guild has its own track, and these are primarily going to be filled in during the harvest phase, but also potentially from some bonuses that you might pick up here and there. Once one player has 3 of these 4 guild tracks filled, it's going to trigger the end of the game. Down the far left of the sheet is the gold chart. Gold is going to be acquired primarily from slaying monsters and getting those rewards. The gold chart is also one of the only areas in the game that grant you access throughout to the various statues, which will give you those end-of-game scoring opportunities. Surrounding the entire castle area on this left sheet is the Knights on the Wall. This is another track that will be primarily triggered through various bonuses around both sheets and give you additional bonuses in order to help slay these monsters. There are 4 monster regions in all, and these are going to be areas that you can go to and eventually score some significant points for slaying the monster, but also some of that gold along the way. And almost all of this right-hand sheet is taken up by the roads section. This road section is going to have the player start at the top of the page and potentially travel down these various paths, reaching these different domains. Each domain contains either an immediate power or an ongoing ability that'll affect the game throughout. And of course, just like all of the other areas we've talked about, the roads are going to contain bonus pips that let you, when filled in, go to other sections and fill in another pip. As you can probably already tell, on that spectrum of roll and writes, which I think includes puzzly roll and writes and sort of combo-centric roll and writes, this game definitely leans on the side of the combo-centric style, because as you fill in pips in one section, you might trigger pips in another section, which thereby might trigger pips in yet another section. So you'll be bouncing around all over your turn on these sheets and feeling very satisfied with almost every turn. And a player's turn is going to start by having them roll all the dice. The red, green, yellow, and blue dice are going to be used during the action phase. But the black dice are the harvest dice, and that's the first thing you do after rolling. The harvest phase is going to focus on the harvest die, of course, and all the players at the table are going to now use these in order to activate whatever citizens they've collected throughout the game. At the beginning of the game, every player is going to have 1 5 and 1 6 citizen, and none others, but throughout the game you might collect more in order to activate them now. In this case, I have a 3, a 6, and a combined 9, which would allow me to activate the 3, the 6, and the 9. But as you can see, I don't have a 3 or a 9, so I'll only be activating my 6 this turn. Since I only have one of the 2 pips shaded under the 6, I'm going to go down to the corresponding guild track and fill in just 1 pip. So in this case, I'm going to fill in 1 pip down here. But as you can see in how you use these dice, once I do potentially have a 3 or a 9 citizen, or potentially 2 pips in some of those, I might be putting pips in multiple guild tracks and multiple pips in those tracks. And the more you do that, the more you're going to get to some of those bonus pips that are going to allow you to move to other sections. So the more citizens you have, the more you're going to be able to fire off a lot of things during the harvest phase. The next phase is when you're going to use a red, green, or yellow die and potentially the optional blue die. The red die is used to slay monsters. The green die is used to travel those roads and reach some of those domains. And the yellow die is used to add more citizens to your tableau. Let me show you just a couple examples just so you get a sense for how it works. If I used the red die to slay monsters, I could use this 5 to shade in the leftmost pip of this section, which requires a 1 to a 6, or this section, which requires a 1 to a 5. But I couldn't use it to fill in any pips on any of the other sections because the 5 just won't work. Now, keep in mind, I could enhance that with this blue 6, giving it an 11 value. That way, I could shade in the leftmost pip of this section, or the leftmost pip of this section right here. The use of that blue die like this to enhance things gives you a lot of flexibility and really lets players do the most with their turns, because if you can't find an option with just one, you can generally use the blue die to find another option. Now instead, I could have used the green die. The green die is going to let you travel on these roads over here. So for example, with a 2, I could travel from any of the shaded pips I already have a little bit further. For example, 1, 2, and then I could claim this domain. This domain is going to give me an ongoing power to manipulate the blue die up or down 1 pip. Now, keep in mind when you use the blue die to enhance the green die, you're going to lose progress potentially because when you do reach a domain, you must stop. And finally, I could have used the yellow die, again with the optional blue. These die would allow me a couple options. If I used the yellow alone, I could fill in the second pip of the 6, or I could use them both to fill in the leftmost empty pip under the 11-12 section. And this is a perfect example to show you how a combo can sort of cascade on your turn. Because if I use this yellow 6 to fill in this pip here, which is a knight, that's going to trigger me to fill in the next pip on the knight's wall, which is a slay icon, which allows me to go to any one of the monster regions and fill in the leftmost empty pip on it. And as you can imagine, if that pip is a bonus, I can move on to the other section that it's associated with and keep going and going. You can really get some pretty significant combos going on any given turn. And just so you can see the options that you have there, some of these pips are just black circles. Those are the standard pips. But like I just showed you, the blue knight is going to trigger the knight's wall. This shield and sword combo is going to let you slay a monster. When you slay monsters, you might fill in a pip that has gold, but when you slay monsters, you might also get gold by using dice. Whenever you get gold, you're going to go over here to the gold chart and fill in the next gold pip. Now, on that gold chart, there are some specific pips that allow you to acquire one of these statues. These statues are going to give you some very specific end-of-game scoring opportunities. So, as you've filled out your sheets, you might start to see some synergies with what some of those statues are offering. So, you might want to go and slay a couple monsters, get some gold so that you can go to the gold charts and get one of those statues. And that's going to go on, turn after turn, rolling the dice, taking the harvest phase, and that player taking their action phase until at least one player has filled in all the pips for 3 of these 4 guild tracks. And once that happens, the rest of the players will finish the round to ensure every player has equal turns. Then you're going to tally up the scores to determine a winner. Your final score is made up of just a few things. The first are the star-shaped pips that you may have filled in throughout the game on both of your player sheets. The next is the number of domains you reached over on the road map. Next are the monsters that you've slayed. To slay a monster, you need to fill in all of the pips in that region. If you're the first to do so, you're going to claim the higher point value. All other players may still slay that monster, but claim the lower points. Add up all of those points for slayed monsters and place it here. Finally, any statues that you may have acquired, you're going to get those end-of-game scoring points and put them here, add them all up for your total. So again, you can see this is a pretty robust roll and write. I think there's a couple big takeaways that I would leave you with. One is that citizen tableau. It really does bring that sort of Machikoro space-based sort of vibe to the game when you're using those harvest dice during the harvest phase. Then it's that combo-licious thing that's going on. You're going to be firing off things in one section that lead to another section that lead to another, that may even lead back to the original section. So every turn you take in this game can be quite satisfying. So Dice Kingdoms is a great addition to the roll and write category and to the world of Valeria, but it is only the second of these 3 games. The last one is for one player to play at the table solo. This is a dice and card game, and it's called Siege of Valeria. This is a game where you're going to be defending your fortress against all of these troops and siege engines, using dice and troop cards yourself. It's a bit like Space Invaders meets Tower Defense. You're going to be defending that fortress against wave after wave of troop, including powerful siege engines where the game gets its name. These siege engines are going to pose a significant threat when in range, but also provide an opportunity for you to win the game. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at what we have here on the table. And again, as with all the rest of these games, this is a prototype, so keep in mind that these components will probably be quite different in the final version. You're going to have your fortress board down here at the bottom. You'll see 5 different spaces across there with little markers for fire. Fire is going to be given to these spaces throughout the game. You don't want fire. Now, the other thing that can go on these spaces are your champions. Champions come off of this deck and can be added to the various spaces on your fortress in a couple of different ways. Some champions have one-time powers and must be discarded after used, while other champions can be used once per round. This champion, for example, lets you reroll 2 spent holy dice, which are your blue dice, but then must be discarded. Whereas this one gives you 2 extra strength versus siege engines and can be used once per round. Above your fortress are 4 rows of troops that come from the troop deck. This row right here is called the Vanguard, and it is the row that you're going to have to watch out for because it is going to do damage to your fortress unless you take care of them during the round. And at the beginning of the game, the back row is made up entirely of siege engines. These are far more powerful units that are going to only do damage and affect you once they're within range. The breach tower, for example, won't do anything to you when it's in row 5, 4, or 3, but it will start to affect you once it's in the second row or in the Vanguard. And this range, if you will, cuts both ways because while it can't affect you until it's in range, you also can't affect it or attack it unless it's in range of you. And finally, you also have your dice, some additional dice that you might get added throughout the game, some tokens to increase the strength of some of the troops, and of course, the dreaded fire tokens that will be added to your fortress. And optionally, you can also play with a deck of event cards. These events are typically going to make things a little bit more challenging, but there are some events in here that actually go in your favor. Unified Rights, for example, is going to have you add 1 magic token to every magic troop in the vanguard, which is that front row. Friends Arrive, on the other hand, is going to allow you to draw 2 champions and add them to your fortress. You're also going to get 2 troop cards of your own. These are the same types of troops that you're going to find out in front of your fortress, and you will be collecting more throughout the game. You're going to be using these along with your dice in order to fend off these forces and trying to defeat those siege engines. The best way to explain it is to show you a sample turn to go through one of the 7 rounds. The first thing you're going to do on your turn is to roll your dice. I've rolled some pretty high dice here, but if you roll low, just know that you're going to be able to use some cards to potentially mitigate those dice. The next thing you're going to have to do is resolve the dreaded siege engines. You're going to do this from left to right, but remember, you're only going to resolve the ones that are within range, which are the green bars. As you can see, this one and this one and this one and this one are still outside of range. But unfortunately, the incendiaries are well within range, and now we have to resolve its effect. The incendiaries say, reroll 1 5 die. We go back to our die and check. I have a holy 5 and an attack 5. I'm going to reroll the holy, and I got a 3. So the bad news is those siege engines are going to mess with your plans. They're going to affect your die. They're going to make things more challenging. However, most of the siege engines aren't actually going to do any damage. That is, until they're up in the vanguard. But until they are, you just need to make sure that you're going to navigate those abilities once they're within range. The next thing we're going to do is resolve an event. I've flipped You've Got Camp Crud. This says that we need to lower 3 of our dice by 1 pip each. So I'll lower this 6 to a 5, this 6 to a 5, and this 2 to a 1. So now our dice are set for the next phase. The action phase is where you're going to use those dice and any of the troops that you have in your hand in order to fend off any of the troops in the vanguard row and potentially any siege engines that are within range. The first thing I'm going to do is play my Troll Brute. This lets me change 1 die to a 6. So I'll discard that card, and I'm going to change this 1 to a 6. Next, I'm going to take a closer look at the troops in the vanguard row to see if there are any that will strategically help me in this round more than others. Because when you defeat a troop, you're going to immediately take possession of it, and then you could use its power. In particular, I like the look of these Dragonkin warlords for their power. So I'm going to use a 5 and a 4 for 9 to take out this 8 value Dragonkin warlord, taking it into my possession. The next thing I'm going to do is to use that Dragonkin warlord. It allows me to double the value of one of my die. I'm going to double this 6 to effectively make it a 12. 12 plus 3 is going to be enough to make 15, which I can now use to take out the incendiaries because in the 5th row, they have a strength of only 14. I'll take that siege engine and remove it from the game, and when you defeat a siege engine, that allows you to draw a champion. So I'll take the top champion off of the deck. It's the Wardsmith Sagen. This is going to let me use a power once per turn, and I'm going to place it right here in this row, right in the middle of my fortress. You can see that this champion is going to prevent the damage to the fortress when the troop above it advances. The next thing I'm going to do is use my Undead Samurai that I started with. This is going to allow me to swap 2 adjacent cards. I'll discard it to the troop discard and then choose any 2 adjacent cards to swap. These can be side by side or on top of one another. I'm going to change this Troll Brute with this Orc Archer. And then use one of my 5s along with this 1 for the 6 to defeat the Orc Archer, placing him into my hand. Now I have the Orc Archer in my hand and the power to gain and roll 1 red die. I'm going to go ahead and use that now. Take a red die from the supply and add it to my own personal pool. Now you see I have a 5 and a 3. That's enough power to take on another Dragonkin Warlord, which is exactly what I'm going to do, and take him into my hand for the next round. Now, unfortunately, it's time to activate the Vanguard. Now, thankfully, I've taken out 3 of the 5 cards, but these 2 Undead Samurai are left to activate. This one is going to do no damage because of my Wardsmith Sajin, and he's going to be discarded. This one, unfortunately, is going to do some damage. So while he is discarded, he's going to add a fire token to this part of my fortress. Fire is what you want to avoid in this game, and actually I feel pretty good about this first round with only 1 fire token added to my fortress. Next, all of the cards in the battlefield are going to advance as close as they can to your fortress. Once you've done this, you're going to check the status of the troop deck. If the troop deck is empty at this point, it's another way that you're going to lose the game. This is a game of survival and combating these siege engines, but survival first and foremost. There are a number of ways to lose, and really only one way to win. Finally, you're going to reinforce the battlefield. You're going to start with siege engines. Any column that doesn't have one is going to get one added in the 5th row. Then you're going to take exactly 4 troop cards and add them to the battlefield from the Vanguard row up. So this would go here, we would add one here, here, and here. This is the new battlefield. At this point, had there been any gaps in any of the columns, the cards from the top would slide down. And you'll notice that some of the siege engines have come a little bit closer, and this catapult here is actually now within range. And remember, you want to try to take care of those siege engines while they're within range, but definitely before they get up into that Vanguard row. Because yes, that is the 3rd way you can lose. If there is ever a siege engine in the Vanguard row when it activates, you will lose the game. The only way to win the game is to exhaust the siege engine deck and make sure every siege engine on the battlefield is also defeated. And you have to do all of that within just the 7 rounds of the game. Now, I've had some experience with some solo games, and I can assure you this is a challenging one. And in fact, that is one of the big takeaways from this game. The challenge and also the puzzle of using these cards along with these dice. I barely just scratched the surface of all the different ways that you can sort of manipulate and mitigate everything that's coming at you and use your dice along with these cards to puzzle things out to make the most of every single round, trying to get those siege engines taken care of. This is truly a unique game to round out the 3 on offer here. So whether you're looking for a chaotic trick-taking experience like Thrones of Valeria, or a roll and write that is absolutely filled with combos, or maybe a solo experience that's going to give you a little bit more challenge than you might expect, I think Daily Magic has something to offer you in one of these 3 games. If you have any questions at all, make sure to make them in the comments below or check out their Kickstarter campaign. I will jump down there to answer everything I can, but until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.